Canada has not had an ambassador to China for over 3 months now. Tensions continue to grow between our country and the Asian nation. It seemed to all start with the arrest of the Huawei executive in Vancouver at the behest of the United States. Joining me now is our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion. Ray, it all began with Huawei, then a couple of Canadians being held hostage, and now the Canadian canola ban. Ottawa's announced some relief for canola farmers, but the Tories argue, you know what, it's not enough.
Yeah, the situation just keeps getting worse. Yeah, you're right. The Tories would like the government to go further. They say that Ottawa should stop contributing to a Chinese organization called the Asian Infrastructure Bank. The Canadian government has committed $256 million over 5 years to that organization. Now, the Liberals say it's good for Canada. Yes, it helps Asia. It helps many countries around the world. But what's good for the international economy is also good for the Canadian economy, they say. So that's the reason they're doing it. But the Conservatives say that what Ottawa's been doing so far to help canola farmers is just not enough. The Liberals should be more aggressive. Now, what was announced earlier this week by Canada's Agriculture Minister is more support for Canada's canola farmers. The $1 million per year for the advanced payment program, for example, is being increased to $1 million. The current limit is $400,000, not $1 million. It's being increased to $1 million a year. And the loan limit for the Agri-Stability Program is going up from $100,000 to $500,000. The deadline to apply has also been extended. So Canada is taking steps, but the federal government intends to do a little bit more. The Trade Diversification Minister, James Carr, this week said that he's going to go abroad to try and find new markets for Canada's canola farmers, because right now, roughly 70% of our exports go to China. So that's way too big a chunk. We need to diversify. So these are some of the measures that Canada has taken right now. But you're right, Canada still doesn't have a full-time ambassador to China. We're represented right now by a chargé d'affaires in Beijing. It's been the case since late January, when the ambassador, Mr. McCallum, lost his job after making some controversial remarks. But the Prime Minister says they're still looking for an ambassador. They want to take their time, he says, to find the right person. But he claims that Canada is well represented right now in Beijing by its chargé d'affaires.
Ray, let's get back to Huawei for just a moment. Ottawa has yet to decide on whether to allow Huawei to play a role in Canada's upcoming 5G network. Can you explain?
Well, yeah, I mean, many of Canada's allies, including the United States, have decided to ban Huawei on suspicion that it's actually a way for the Chinese government to spy on countries. Actually, earlier this week, there was a piece in the news saying that British telecommunications company Vodafone has found that Huawei used some hidden functions in their network to spy on some internet network in Italy. Huawei has denied being engaged in espionage on behalf of the Chinese government. But, you know, there's this big cloud of suspicion right now. The United States is trying to convince Canada to ban Huawei from its upcoming 5G network. But Canada says, we're going to be making our own decision. We have yet to make a decision. But the Public Safety Minister, Ralph Goodale, said this week that a decision will be made and announced before the election. So at least now we seem to have a deadline as far as Huawei's participation in Canada's upcoming 5G network is concerned.
Alberta Premier Jason Kenney met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Ottawa recently. Now, before their meeting, however, Kenney testified before a Senate committee studying the government's bill to rewrite the rules for environmental assessments of energy projects. Kenney says the bill is pushing thoughts of secession in Alberta. We used to Quebec talk about separating, but now Alberta talk about separating. He said he will launch a constitutional challenge if the bill passes as is. Ray, Albertans are not happy. Neither is our Premier, Jason Kenney.
No, and it was plain to see during the photo opportunity, you know, Mr. Kenney didn't smile very much as he was about to sit down for a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The two of them, as you know, have known each other for a very long time. When Jason Kenney was immigration minister in the Harper government, Mr. Trudeau was for 3 years his Liberal critic. But yeah, he didn't mince words this week. He talked about the possibility of Alberta maybe eventually seceding from Canada if Bill C-69 is not changing. He said that Bill C-69 as it is currently written, would be a catastrophe for Alberta's economy and a catastrophe for Canada's national unity. And some of Mr. Trudeau's cabinet ministers didn't appreciate what Mr. Trudeau said. They said that his words weren't helpful to the dialogue. They want to have a constructive dialogue with the new Premier of Alberta. They said that he's basically just like Doug Ford and Andrew Scheer, the federal Conservative leader. He's being very partisan. It remains to see if his visit to Ottawa will accomplish anything. But as far as I can tell, the Liberals are determined to pass Bill C-69 now.
And you talk to a lot of Albertans who voted in the UCP and Jason Kenney, and they're excited for the fact that this guy's a pit bull and he's got that relationship in Ottawa and he's fighting for Albertans right now. Now, will the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline be approved? Some Liberals think it will not, Ray.
Well, yeah, there are actually some Liberals who are lobbying the Prime Minister right now. This is something that Radio-Canada reported earlier this week. They think that approving the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion would actually be a bad idea for the Liberal brand. They believe that their party should do more for the environment, and that, approving the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion would be counterproductive in that way. As you know, the Liberals are trying to win seats in the province of Quebec, where the word pipeline is something that's become toxic. We saw the whole debate a few years ago about Energy East. Their Premier, François Legault, says there's no social acceptability for pipelines anymore in that province. Many Quebecers don't approve of anything that goes against the Green movement right now. So that's why some Liberal MPs are lobbying Prime Minister Trudeau, trying to convince him to say no to the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. We'll see where it goes. As we talked about last week, there was Marc Garneau who said that making that project a reality is priority number one right now for the federal government. They're supposed to decide to make a final decision on Trans Mountain by June 18th. They keep saying it's their number one priority. We'll see how it goes.
Ray, many people are concerned with our nation's deficit and debt. Some surprising numbers were actually published this week regarding the deficit, and it may not be as bad as we thought.
No, some intriguing numbers. The March budget projected a $15 billion deficit for the last fiscal year, the one that ended on March 31st. But the numbers for the first 11 months of the last fiscal year show the government had a surplus of $3.1 billion. So how do you go from a surplus after 11 months to a $15 billion deficit after 12 months? That means for the last month of the last fiscal year, the government would have to have an $18 billion deficit. We'll see how it goes, but the government claims that its projection in the March budget is accurate. They're still going to have a $15 billion deficit and an $18.9 billion deficit for next year. Let me remind you, Hal, in case you forgot, but I'm sure you didn't, that during the campaign, Justin Trudeau promised to balance the book by 2019. The Liberals keep saying it's not going to happen.
I thought it was going to balance itself, but then again, I've been lied to before.
That's what Mr. Trudeau once said, yeah.
As for economy, Ray, it's not running as strongly as it once did?
No, the Canadian economy actually shrank a bit, 0.3%, a 0.3% contraction in the month of February. Those numbers were made public this week. And obviously last week we talked about the Bank of Canada, which had decided last week to hold off indefinitely, perhaps, on increasing the interest rates in the country. Precisely because of that, the economy has slowed considerably. It's not doing as well as it was. It's supposed to pick up towards the end of 2019 and even more next year. But for the time being, looks like Canada's economy is not doing as well as the Bank of Canada had initially predicted.
Members of Parliament, including our very own MP here in Lethbridge, Rachel Harder, they're getting a raise. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, an increase many people across Canada will certainly envy, an extra $3,300 over the next year. So that's taking an MP's basic salary to $178,900 a year. That's because of an automatic yearly adjustment that was introduced nearly 20 years ago by the former Jean Chrétien government. Of course, members of parliament work very hard. They're spending a lot of time here in the nation's capital, away from their constituency and their family. But the Canadian Taxpayers Federation this week said it's surprised by the extra amount of money they're getting. The CTF saying it looks like elected officials are getting a better deal than the people they're paid to represent.
Wow. Now let's talk about the flooding where you are in Ottawa, also Quebec and New Brunswick. The feds are thinking long term when it comes to compensation and a plan as well to help a lot of those provinces.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's absolutely sad what's going on right now here in the nation's capital. Many areas remain underwater. They've been flooded for 2 weeks. The Ottawa River, which stands between the Quebec and the Ontario sides, is at an all-time high, and it's probably going to remain at that level for another 2 weeks. So, can you imagine the poor people living close to the river? Many have lost everything. So, yeah, the federal government says it wants to strike a provincial/federal committee in Ontario, in Quebec, and in New Brunswick to try and come up with permanent solutions, long-term solutions for these communities. Does it mean they're going to be building dikes? Does it mean that they're going to ask people to move away from those flood-prone areas? It remains to be seen, but the federal government says something must be done because of climate change. And I don't know if you've heard about that community north of Montreal where a lot of people are angry. There's a dike that gave way last weekend, flooding hundreds and hundreds of homes. Many people there too have lost everything. We learned this week that municipal authorities knew there was a weakness in the dam, but they didn't do anything for 18 months. The mayor telling reporters that she was waiting to see if she could get a government grant to do the work because we're told that it's very expensive work that needed to be carried out. It wasn't done, and now a lot of people in her community want to move. They want to go away. Many of them have lost everything. So a lot of sad stories right now in 3 provinces.
That is very sad, you're right. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer has promised to unveil his environmental plan before Parliament rises for the summer. Many Canadians have been wondering, and he's going to deliver now.
Yeah, he says he's going to deliver. The fact of the matter is, he was supposed to announce that plan, unveil it last weekend at a gathering of conservative militants in Victoriaville, Quebec. But because of the floods in many areas of Quebec, New Brunswick, and Ontario, he's decided to hold off a few more weeks. He's now promising that he will unveil a plan that will contain credible targets to reduce Canada's greenhouse gas emissions over the coming weeks. He's going to do so, he says, before the parliamentary session ends on June 21st.
The cost for Canada's campaign to get a UN Security Council seat is rising. Ray, do we even really need one? How important is it for Canada to have a seat at the United Nations?
Well, Canada says it's important for its image. Remember when he became Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau said Canada is back. The former Harper Conservatives failed to win a seat in 2007, which was the first time Canada was denied a seat at the UN's Security Council. So, yeah, the federal government has been campaigning actively. As you know, the decision is going to be made next year. There's going to be a vote at the UN for a 2021 seat. Canada's in the running against 2 other countries. Since 2016, $1.5 million has been spent, including $1 million in the last 10 months alone. That's according to access to information documents obtained by the CBC. We're talking about things like trips, gifts to foreign dignitaries. There are also 11 government employees who are working on Canada's bid here in Ottawa, but also in New York City. $1.5 million, by the way, is quite the bargain compared to the $10 million Canada spent on its candidacy 20 years ago, the last time Canada won a seat at the UN Security Council.
Ray, SNC-Lavalin is haunting the Liberals once again, this time thanks to some illegal contributions to the Liberal Party of Canada.
Well, that's right. It was revealed earlier this week that a decade ago, the Liberal Party of Canada received illegal donations from some executives at the company. It's a scheme that was concocted by former executives who are now gone. They're no longer working for SNC-Lavalin. The Prime Minister was asked about it this week, and he said that things have changed within the Liberal Party of Canada, that his political party would not accept those donations if they were made if they were to be made today. But still, this is a scheme that got the Liberals $118,000 10 years ago, and $8,000 went to the Conservative Party of Canada under the same scheme.
And for those Canadians who want an electric vehicle, electric cars are now a little cheaper to purchase thanks to new subsidy from the feds.
Yeah, this is an announcement that was made in the last federal budget. We're talking about up to $5,000 off the cost of an electric vehicle and $2,500 for plug-in hybrids. Originally, this was supposed to apply only for cars that are retailed at less than $45,000, but because the federal government wants more Canadians to go green, they've decided to raise that bar to $55,000. They want us to go green.
There you go. Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, joining me once again from Ottawa. Thanks so much, Ray.
You're welcome, Hal.